here's what could happen, right? This is what potentially worries me. The price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin. Now, people start worrying that MicroStrategy is going to pose a systemic risk to the entire system, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside. They may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. Maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin, right? If MicroStrategy gets too big, I could potentially see a danger on the way down.
If Michael Saylor's strategy unravels, Bitcoin could take a hit, but the real threat is the panic it might spark. A fear-driven sell-off could trigger a vicious cycle, shaking the entire market. That's the latest warning from Wall Street veteran and mathematician Fred Krueger. Saylor's bold Bitcoin investments have made MicroStrategy a major player, but heavy leverage comes with serious risk. If a deep bear market strikes and debt piles up, panic could set in. Investors holding MSTR shares might dump them first, fearing margin calls or forced Bitcoin sales. If that happens, Bitcoin's price could plunge, not due to weak fundamentals, but because of fears that MicroStrategy might be forced to liquidate. Stick around until the end of the video as Fred Krueger breaks down the risks, opportunities, and what's really next for Bitcoin.
Stop. You don't have time. Don't miss out this 2025 bull run. Educate yourself first ahead of the crowd. We have created the ultimate step-by-step crypto cheat guide that will guide you this bull run. Unlock the secrets of crypto and make smarter investments today. Now by clicking on the link below to get your exclusive copy just under $10.
But if the price drops, you have to put more Bitcoin up, right?
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, you have to repay the loan. You know, those are your choices. I'm just saying, all of a sudden you can get into a world of pain, right?
Yeah.
With these, you know, now. Again, when does that happen? That happens in a bear market. In a bear market, do you really like having $5 billion of debt in a bear market? No, that's usually what kind of destroys you. When we do have the next bear market, and I don't know what will drive it, I don't know. I don't especially know if we can predict when it's going to be, right? And but I think in that bear market, what are people going to sell first? MSTR or the Bitcoin that they have in cold storage?
MSTR.
Right. They're going to sell MSTR, right? So if they're sitting on MSTR and MSTR is trading in a multiple of 3 or 4 or even 2, they're going to be like, well, I'm going to get rid of this first, right? It's like it's run by Saylor. He might get some liquidated. He might have some margin calls, whatever. You know, if I got my Bitcoin in cold storage, well, that I know. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Great. Like, if we get into a complete bear market, right, there's not going to be any new convertible bond offerings. There won't. Those things will be on ice, okay? And do you think they're going to be selling more stock? No, they will not. They will not be selling stock at 1 times multiple or 0.9 times a multiple. Here's the problem there, okay? They could sell bonds. Yes, they could sell bonds similar to the bonds that they sold their first batch of bonds, right? If you remember, those bonds were at a 9% yield or so, 6% yield initially.
This was in 2020.
They would be yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those were like actual Bitcoin-backed bonds. They actually had to segment out, say this Bitcoin is going to be used as collateral for those bonds, right? Very, very tricky, which is one of the reasons they quickly paid off those bonds, right? They did not want to have that stuff sitting on their balance sheet. Would they do that? Yes, they could do that, right? They could definitely say, listen, we got all this Bitcoin. We're not going to sell this Bitcoin, right? But we're going to take, I don't know, let's take 100,000 Bitcoin that they have, right? And then we're going to pledge that Bitcoin and we're going to borrow some money against that Bitcoin. Right. And what would the interest rate there be? Would it be 1%? Absolutely not. Okay. That Bitcoin is going to, that loan is going to be a 6% loan. Okay. It will, you know, I mean, in today's environment, it'd be a 9% loan. Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm just saying, and it would be collateralized by the Bitcoin. So are they going to issue a convertible bond? Nope. They're not going to do it. If their stock is trading and we're in the depths of a bear market, they're not issuing convertible bonds. They're issuing bonds against Bitcoin, high coupon. They're going to tie up Bitcoin, and everybody's going to start worrying about those bonds, triggering some redemption clause, right? What they can say is that they need to have a certain amount of collateral, otherwise they need to sell, right? They sort of say, this loan is backed by these Bitcoin. This is what potentially worries me, is we add so much convertible debt to this thing. Let's suppose we get to $30 billion of convertible debt, okay? Let's say, right? And now all of a sudden we hit a really bad bear market. Now people start worrying that MicroStrategy is going to pose a systemic risk to the entire system.
Okay.
And they're going to start, the price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside.
Despite reporting a $670 million loss in Q4 2024, MicroStrategy's stock has surged 370% over the past year, with analysts speculating it could join the S&P 500. The company now holds 478,040 BTC, worth over $46 billion, after adding 28,032 BTC in 2024 alone. To fuel even more Bitcoin acquisitions, it issued a $2 billion debt offering with 0% interest, doubling down despite Bitcoin's price volatility. With major institutions closely watching, MicroStrategy's bold Bitcoin strategy continues to keep the market on edge. Now, let's turn back to Fred Krueger as he dives deeper into the situation.
Does that mean it's a systemic danger long-term for Bitcoin? No, but it just could mean we get into a really bad bear market for Bitcoin. Yeah. And one of the casualties of that bear market might be MSTR, right? It might be, right? So there's definitely some scenario where MSTR goes bust. Okay, in my opinion, that's not zero, right? The way. So I don't think it's going to be, again, none of this stuff's catastrophic for Bitcoin. And 20 years from now,
everything is good for Bitcoin. At the end of the day, if MicroStrategy,
ultimately, it's all good for Bitcoin. But I'm just saying. Yeah. I just think if you were looking at this thing from a personal point of view, I really think there's two ways you can look at this. First of all is you're one of the many people in the world who can't buy Bitcoin. Okay, and I put a tweet out today because I just was like, okay, if you can't buy Bitcoin but you can buy MSTR, raise your hand. And I had people like, well, I live in Norway, I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in the UK, I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in Saudi Arabia, I can't buy Bitcoin. I live in Sweden, I can't buy Bitcoin. I'm a client of Vanguard, I can't buy Bitcoin. So there's all these people out there who just can't buy the ETF, right? And many people in Europe, they just can't even buy physical Bitcoin. It's just too hard, right? So there's a whole class of people for which, if they want exposure to this general asset class, MSTR is one of very few ways that they can easily participate, right? If you're in the UK and your main source of money is in your pension fund or something, and the only way to have access to this is to buy MSTR, right? That's your only choice, right? You're in a different category than Rajat sitting in Toronto, and you can buy actual Bitcoin if you want. So I think that there are sort of two kinds of people. One is people who just can't buy anything else and have to buy MSTR. They're sort of trapped into liking it or not. Now, whether it's an asset that delivers more Bitcoin every year, it has a Bitcoin yield, I get all that, right?
Yeah.
But that's one class of people. The other class of people is people who have Bitcoin and, they may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. And maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin, right? I was one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
I bought calls on MSTR. I did really well with my calls on MSTR, okay? But do I see a massive need to buy MSTR at 3 times the amount of Bitcoin? Even if they're producing a Bitcoin yield? No, I don't. If you look at the log price of Bitcoin, right, the log of Bitcoin price, and you average the logs over 4 years, you'll see that that's just a complete straight line, right? So, I think that the chance of us deviating from that behavior in the next 4 years is very low, right? I don't think if something fits a straight line with 99% R squared, that you're going to see that line break in 4 years,
MicroStrategy's approach has made it a go-to investment for those unable to buy Bitcoin directly. However, that dependence carries significant risks. If Bitcoin enters a brutal bear market, MSTR could be one of its biggest casualties. Despite these risks, Bitcoin's long-term trajectory remains intact. As Krueger highlighted, mathematical data shows Bitcoin following a steady growth pattern, driven by supply dynamics and increasing adoption. MicroStrategy may eventually falter, but Bitcoin will keep moving forward. In the end, those who weather the storm will be the ones holding the real asset, not relying on someone else's leverage. For more Daily Dose Crypto news, check out these 2 awesome videos on your screen. Click now and we will see you on the next video.